To another video, guys. Today we're gonna be talking about all of the best budget decks you could be taking to Legend. And some of these decks, people literally take to Legend in their first month of playing Hearthstone, so that says a lot. I hope you find the video helpful, and if you do, a like and subscribe would be awesome. And don't forget you can check me out live on stream each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, where I do my best to give you guys the best decks in Hearthstone right now. Now, let's check out the decks.
You are not prepared!
The first deck on the list is going to be none other than Elemental Mage, and as you can see, this thing costs only 1640 dust. That is literally just a single legendary right there, and that is kinda insane, not gonna lie. This deck only has a couple of epics in there and a couple of rares, and everything else is just literally common cards, some of which are even free from the core set, so you really are supposed to be able to craft this thing in your first month of playing Hearthstone with ease, and you can even be hitting Legend with this thing, or at least Diamond 5 for sure. The deck is nice and quick, straightforward and simple. Basically, you try to build a board in your first few turns, and from there on out, you try to finish off the opponent with the bunch of burn damage you have from hand, and that usually gets you there. You have a ton of card draw with things like Living Flame, which draws you a couple of fire spells, the Blazing Aggression, which draws everything, and you don't discard anything because you have nothing but elementals and fire spells. The Conjured Bookkeepers are amazing in here, fishing out even more spells for you, and you can generate a little bit more cards with things like Violet Spellwing for arcane missiles, as well as Flame Geysers and Fireflies for extra 1/2 elementals in your hand. If you manage to stick something like a Windswept Page Turner, that can be amazing for a lot of extra damage, and you do have a good amount of AoE with things like Solar Flare, which does drop down to 0 if you have a full board, or even just 5, and that way you can handle the opponent's board while actually connecting face. For the matchups for this deck, you are gonna have quite a few polarizing ones, and Death Knights would be at the top of the naughty list for you, but as you can see, some of the most popular matchups like Ravenous Cliff Demon Hunter, Midrange Shaman even, Aggro and Bubble Pally, and so on and so forth are actually pretty good, or at least 50-50 for you, so really you shouldn't have problem climbing with this one for the most part. Dragon Warriors and Quest Warriors, however, also would be pretty nasty against you. When you're in the mulligan phase with this deck, going first, you are going to try to curve out properly with your good early game minions, and you are going to be happy with a Sizzling Cinder, Violet Spellwing, Firefly is also okay. The Living Flame for turn 2 would be amazing, followed up by a Conjured Bookkeeper on turn 3, or a Blazing Aggression, both would be amazing, and the rest you don't really care about too much, you're just going to try to keep the 1-2-3s. You're gonna notice we're not calling on things like Glacial Shard or Flame Geyser, even though they are 1-drops. They're not gonna be amazing for you, so try to get a little bit better curve. On the coin, again, we can see plenty of the same stuff, so mulligan accordingly. If you want to make this deck better and a little bit more expensive, you could actually slap yourself a Zephyrus in here instead of a Glacial Shard, for instance, and that will give you an extra layer of strategizing, but for the most part, you're gonna be looking for face damage out of Zephyrus, and that should be great for you. On the number 2 spot, we have Aggro Pally, which is another great cheap deck you could be using to easy Legend. I'm not sure why it's stated it's 1440 dust, like are some of these cards given to us for free, like the Crusader Aura for instance or something? Muster for Battle is from the core set. We gotta craft the Violet Treasure Gill, and we gotta craft Urson Maul, so the math ain't mathin' for me, but maybe a lot of the cards are free or something, I'm not sure. Either way, it's definitely pretty cheap, 0 legendaries and whatnot, so definitely a great choice for most. Aggro Pally does have some great stats right now, but again, it does suffer from some polarizing matchups, but as long as you put the games in, you should have no problem climbing with this one. And here again, it's a pretty straightforward and simple deck. It's even more simple. Here you only fight for the boards, and if you lose the board, you don't have really great ways to actually recover, but sometimes you could. We have great early game with a lot of good minions, and you get the buff and big with Crusader Auras and Flash Sales, and we also have the Urson Maul, with which you can be fishing out more of your Urson Maul or some of your other buff cards. We have a good amount of card draw with things like Platosaur, Hand of Adal, Violet Treasure Gill, which fishes out Hand of Adal, and the Urson Moles, and you can do some pretty obscene things super early, especially if the opponent doesn't have early game removal. So all around games will be quick with this one, and pretty simple too. Matchup wise, like I said, pretty polarizing stuff, especially against Death Knights, against Demon Hunters, but the cool thing is you're gonna be slightly positive against Midrange Shaman, so that's great, but again, Warriors could be a problem for you. But everything else does look super green for you, so again, as long as you're not facing too many other control-y stuff, you should be great. When first, again, try to curve off nice and good with your good early game minions, and if you're already curving into something like a Crusader Aura or a Flash Sale, you might even consider that, even though going first it's not as probable for that to be a keep. On the coin, the situation is slightly different. Here I'd say Flash Sale does make a little bit more sense, because you could do it as soon as turn 3 even, but for the most part, try to get the good 1-2-3 curve, and you should be good. If you do want to make this better, crafting yourself Ziliax would not be a bad idea, even though it is rotating out in about 3 months, so be careful with that. But honestly, if there's any card you should be crafting, it should be Ziliax right now, because you could be fitting it in all sorts of different decks and you're gonna be happy about it. The Ziliax you will want to build with this one would be the +1/-1 module, so you can actually give +1 attack to all of your other minions, but technically speaking, the self-damaging growing Ziliax might also be worth it for 4 mana. On the number 3 spot, we are starting to see decks with a little bit of legendaries here and there, and this one is gonna be Face Hunter. Face Hunter is a really decent deck right now. It has been even stronger here and there, as you see. It has had some pretty crazy days. Right now it's not so great, but still a pretty decent deck to be climbing with nice and quick. Again, with a bunch of polarizing matchups, but again, if you do fit in a lot of games, you should be able to climb. This deck is trying to still build some board in the early turns, a lot like the Elemental Mage. You're trying to build a little bit of minion stuff on the board, and after that you could be finishing off opponents from hand, especially with the help of the legendary card Neri of the Creator, which honestly I think you could try the deck without him, but it is supposed to make it better. With this guy you could either just tempo him out on turn 2 or 3 and follow up with a bunch of 1-drop minions, which are gonna become twice as big. That goes especially strong on things like Catch of the Day, making it into a 6/6, but you can also double up spells like Arcane Shot, Tracking even, Wound Prey, and the rock you get out of the Rock Skipper for instance could be great like that. So yeah, he's definitely kinda worth it. You do have a lot of burn damage with your spells, you do have a lot of wonky minions the opponent is gonna have to handle, and you even have yourself Patchwork Pals with Huffer in there, which can also be pretty nasty from hand. All around the deck is not as cheap, but honestly if you try it without Neri, you're still gonna get a good idea about the deck and decide for yourself if the investment is worth for it. At least Neri is not rotating anytime soon, so you have that going for you. Matchup wise we don't have that much here, but again, Dragon Warrior and Quest Warrior not your friends, mid-range Shaman on the 50/50, and you're gonna be fine against Protoss Mage and Rafael Warlock it seems. I think you're gonna be great against things like Druids as well, so there's that too. When curving out with it, Quell the Ray Fletcher would be amazing, Vicious Slitter Spear as well, Sizzling Cinder or Catch of the Day. Basically try to keep one of your good early game minions. Technically speaking, with a deck like this you could even keep 3 1-drops and feel okay about it, especially if you're expecting to get an Arrow Retriever or just straight out have an Arrow Retriever already and already a couple of 1-drops. That might actually be worth it. The remote control ain't too bad, even though it's not top tier either. I wouldn't really hold on to Wound Prey going first, neither would I hold on to Wormhole. Honestly just stick with the 1-drops and the weapon, the rest doesn't feel too strong. On the coin, again, plenty of the same stuff. Here Wound Prey does make a lot more sense, and I'd say Neri makes a lot more sense. Like turn 2 Neri could be devastating against a lot of opponents. Having yourself a turn 2 2/5 that can potentially make an amazing turn 3 play for you could be great. How can you make the deck better? Technically speaking, you could include yourself the Fabled card, which is another great inclusion for the deck, and you could be removing Bursting Shot and Wormhole, even though the deck does sound a little bit on the wonky side this way, because you are going to be adding yourself way too many free drops in the deck, which is going to make it a lot harder for you to actually get the Arrow Retriever to do what it's supposed to do. On the number 4 spot, we have a budget variant of Protoss Mage, which is a very strong archetype right now, or more like a very annoying archetype if we gotta be completely honest, but I was actually surprised to see how cheap this deck could be built. The only legendary card in here is Chrono Lord Deos, and didn't we get this guy for free, guys? Yeah, we did, so this is literally minus 1600, so the deck is under 2000 dust right now, but you could be doing a lot of crazy things with it. I really do like this variant with tons more card draw, with things like Conjured Bookkeeper, double Smoldering Grove, a single Flame Elemental that fishes out Smolderings, and even Busy Peons that are gonna make your locations a lot easier to drop. And we do have Deos, with which you could be doubling up your Colossuses, which should be costing close to 0 after you're done with the Warp Gates. It's a pretty interesting list. It has a little bit more elementals, so you can actually activate things like Conjured Bookkeeper, which could be really strong to fish out your Protoss spells. You do have a lot of armor gain with things like Shield Battery, but what you don't have in this variant is the 5-mana Freezing Elemental, which I really believe is a big no-no. I would definitely include a couple of those instead of, let's say, Tidepool Pupils and maybe Marooned Archmage. But right now, this is a variant listed as a very cheap option, so I decided just to show it as is. For the matchups, we actually have a decently populated sample size, but again, Quest Warrior not so great, and mid-range Shaman pretty fucky. And as for the mulligan, here's what it looks like. You could be holding on to your Living Flame, the Violet Spellwing, Sizzling Cinder, Busy Peon, Conjured Bookkeeper, especially if you already have a cheap elemental. Smoldering Grove could be a straight out keep. Marooned Dark Mage can also be worth it, and the first spell you get to play with this guy would be 0 if it was 2 mana or less, so that's kind of cool. Shield Battery can also be okay. Primordial Glyph or Resonance Coil also kind of okay, but not as amazing. I'd say Photon Cannon is also not the worst thing in the world to keep against most matchups, but the stats kind of disagree on that, at least for the keep rate. On the coin, again, try to get your good early game card draw, some elementals, some proto spells, and you should be doing pretty good. If you want to make the deck a little bit bigger and better, you could include a Serra, even though this variant does have lower win rate than the one I showed you. Here's a variant that includes a Sleet Skater, which also isn't as good, but you definitely do have options, so decide for yourself how you want to be building this deck. The best variant of it definitely does have plenty of legendaries, like things like Bob the Bartender. Khadgar could get included even though it's not essential. Definitely would like to have a Serra for even more mana for bigger shenanigans with the Colossuses, and I really do believe a couple of Sleet Skaters are gonna do you wonders, so definitely find room for those. You could also build it with Elise the Navigator, but that would be an entirely different deck without the elemental package, so honestly I don't even like the Elise the Navigator variant as much. But yeah, I do have other Protoss Mage decks on the channel, so you might want to give those a check. And the last deck on the list is one of my favorites, which would be none other than Handbuff Death Knight, and this is another really cheap deck you could be using to easy legend, even though right now the meta is not the best for it. City Chief Esho was a free card we got not too long ago, I do believe, so again, this deck is gonna be under 3000 dust for you, and it's a pretty fun archetype. What you're trying to do in the first few turns is try to play some early game cards that are gonna give you a bunch of corpses, try to card draw, try to maybe buff a little, and around turn 4 and 5 you try to buff a lot, and on turn 5 and 6 you start putting down some really big men, which a lot of opponents can't really handle. This deck does have a single Poison Breath with which you could be slapping it on your nice and big Darkhorn Quilter, and that should be a full board clear as well as a bunch of phase damage. You could also be using it on a single hero power or a 1/1 or a cheap undead on the board you already have ready to attack, or even on the Dreadhound Handler. With the Brittlebone Buccaneer you could be giving yourself Reborn on your Handler, on your Baron, and especially on your Amateur Puppeteers, which you could also discover extra copies of thanks to your Toy Snatching Geists. All around the deck is pretty fun, pretty high rolly, and it could be giving you a lot of easy wins, but again, it might not be the best option for easy legend. You definitely should be able to hit at least Diamond 5 with it though. Matchup wise, this is one of the few decks that's actually going to be great against Quest Warrior apparently, but not so much against Midrange Shaman it seems. As for the mulligan, you are going to be looking for things like Morbid Swarm, Dreadhound Handler, the Toy Snatching Geist is okay, the Dread Raptor also kinda okay, but try to be curving into it. I wouldn't really call down to the Lesser Spinal Spellstone going first much because you're not going to be buffing that many things. If you're curving into the Puppeteer, that could be great, and Brittlebone Buccaneer might also make sense against certain matchups. On the coin, again, try to get the good early game corpse cards, a little bit of card draw. The Amateur Puppeteer happens on turn 4 here. Toy Snatching Guy's still fine, Dread Raptor still okay, that kind of stuff. And honestly, I'm not sure you can really make this deck better. I think this is one of the best variants I'm showing you right now, so this one is not really worth talking about too much. I think it's a little bit on the wonky side actually. So that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Do let me know what's your favorite cheap deck in Hearthstone right now, and how high have you managed to climb with it. Thanks for watching. I'm Kris05, and I'll see you in my next video or stream.